Welcome to Conversations of Hope, shining light on the journey of healing from abuse and trauma. I'm Faith Ingraham of Speaking Truth in Love Ministries.
And I'm Michelle Viscuse from Journey Pink. As survivors and advocates, we're here to support, educate, and inspire. Whether you're a survivor of abuse, a friend, family member, or a professional working with survivors, this podcast is for you.
We're breaking the silence that allows abuse to thrive, offering insights for healing and tools for effective support.
Our goal is to create a safe community of understanding, healing, and hope for survivors and their allies.
Visit conversationsofhopepodcast.org for resources and more information. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Welcome to Conversations of Hope. Today we're continuing our discussion with Sarah and her parents, Suzi and Rusty. And also I have Dale, my husband, here with me today. And since it's an in-person interview, Michelle is not with us today. So we're going to continue our discussion from our last session.
Yeah, so I was thinking about, as we ended our last session, and we were talking about kind of your healing journey and then mom and dad and kind of how that was looking and the role you play. Because Faith and I, we have a lot of parents will come to us and we'll have survivors come to us. But mom and dads will often say, you know, my children don't have anything to do with us now, or it's a very distant relationship because they feel like we didn't protect them. And they're struggling with how do we help them heal? How do we support them? They don't know kind of what that looks like or should look like. And then we hear from a lot of survivors whose parents just are not supportive. In some cases, which I know this has to be like a knife being stabbed into you, but in some cases, mom and dad say they don't believe that whether it's a sexual abuse or domestic violence, they think their child is not telling the truth. And that has to be so painful. But maybe we can explore what a healthy healing journey looks like and how mom and dad have been a part of that. And I don't know which one of you want to start with that, but.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, there were definitely pieces that I wanted to be protective of my parents in a way, right? I knew what I was carrying and when I fully realized it, but it took me a long time to really recognize it as predatory. I really had carried all the blame myself, thinking that I had lacked in boundaries, that I had allowed this to happen. So I was a little nervous about sharing this, disclosing it to my parents. And at this point, I had also recognized the grooming process and was also able to say, I think you guys were groomed too. I think that I never once thought that my parents had ill intent. I never once was under the belief that they were just wanting to harm me in any way, shape, or form. So I think that was a big piece for me, that I knew that there was, good intent. I'm a very empathetic person, and I didn't, it was hard for me to let them share my pain as well. I will also say that at this point in our relationship, because our relationship has had ebbs and flows, there's been things that had happened over time. I feel like my parents had proven to me that they would love me unconditionally, which wasn't, whether that was my personal experience or my interpretation of that, I didn't necessarily always feel that way. I always felt like being a pastor's kid, growing up in the church, that there was a certain set of expectations of you had to live this way for us to love you, right? And that had by this time gone away. I was pretty confident that my parents were going to love me no matter what, regardless of, what I had to share or how this was shaping my trajectory.
So when Sarah first came to us, it was just so devastating, when we really heard what really went on, that didn't know what to do. At first, it was like, I was just like, oh my God, I don't know, Lord, what just happened here? Because this has been a long time, that between, that situation, and thought that was dead and gone, so to speak, And but as you meditate on those, like, okay, I needed time, right? So it was like really not much went on. We first, said, oh, we're so sorry, I mean, the initial, asking of being sorry for what happened. It's like, as you go through the process of that, it's like, okay, getting forgiveness is not enough. It's like, what are we going to do now to support her and help her? And I think, like, when you make a life devastating mistake, right? It's like, how, you first think, oh, how do you fix it? Well, there's really no fix to it. And as far as it never happening again, or, well, I mean, not happening again, could
Going
happen,
back and
but
fixing
they're
it,
going
yeah.
back, you can't go back, right? So how do you do that? And it's like, I had to come to the thought process of, like, do I believe him or do I believe my own daughter? So those questions go through your head. And I'm like, well, of course I'm going to believe my daughter,
Right.
And so because I believed my daughter, I'm like, well, now I'm going to give her the support as much as I can give at this time. And it took a little bit, because at that time I was still an elder at that church, and, through that process, we brought you in, and I'm pushing for change in the eldership area of, policies and procedures for the church, not to let this happen again, and Sarah, I don't know, you'll have to speak to that, but on the other side, like, how can you go to the place that I was abused at? And I'm like, well, how do I best make change? Because I'm there, I'm on the inside, to make that change. So we tiptoed around, pretty much each other, at that time, to just, like, okay, I gotta let you be you, and you let me be me, and we worked through that, and ended up where, after a few years, then I released myself from that and resigned, and kind of just decided that I was going to support her, with everything that I had.
And I will say, at first, I really could not understand why he would choose to stay within that same place that it all happens. But as I've done advocacy work, now I recognize the need for those in the institutions to be a voice for victims, and to be a voice to say, no, we need change, and this is what's going to happen to follow through. Otherwise, I think that they would just completely walk away from the situation altogether and just keep turning a blind eye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with there are so many organizations, churches, conferences, mission boards, colleges. Inevitably, these situations will come up. It's sad to say, like you were saying in that video clip that we played this afternoon, the typical response is churches don't deal with the abuse. And we often find an individual or a small group of individuals that are trying to make change. And they're hopeful. And sometimes it's the victims who've come back, and they're hopeful that their story is going to impact leadership. But so many times leadership will dig in their heels and actually become defensive, don't want to deal with it, and they want you to leave. And in many cases, they're okay with the offender. If the offender just says, I'm sorry, the offender can come and participate in whatever. And it's the victims getting pushed out. And that's exactly what God talks about in Ezekiel 34. He's talking about the evil shepherds with Israel. And it's the wounded that were cast out. And you got the evil shepherds running the place in many cases.
And we have heard from people that have been advocates that go to the court proceedings with victims, and very seldom do the church members come and support victims, but they will come and support the offender, and they will show that they're behind the offender, and they'll bring up all of his good qualities and all of this, but they re-victimize the victim. And no wonder, even you're now normally feeling shame anyway as a victim or survivor, and they just add more and more shame onto it. And then oftentimes the church, and we love the church, and we love God. And we're not trying to just bash the church, because I think there are people that are just misinformed, and they are uneducated. They don't know what they don't know, or they don't listen. But we need to be better at saying, how can we help you? How can we walk with you through your healing journey? And not just say, okay, you just need to get over this, because you're making us very uncomfortable right now. And a lot of times we don't want to sit in discomfort. And so if we can just get you to go away and not tell us what we're doing wrong, then we'll feel a lot better. So that's sad.
It is, and it's so hard as a survivor. You're putting so much energy into just healing, and that takes an enormous amount of time, energy, and resource. And so then to also try to advocate for yourself and fight and try to be heard is a lot of extra energy as well, that you feel. There's been many times where I'm like, this should not be my responsibility. Me telling you that you need to come alongside me and you need to, work with the police investigation, or me telling you how to help me doesn't feel like something that should be my responsibility.
Right. And remember where Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, and he said, you bind heavy burdens and lay them on people, but you won't use one of your fingers to uplift it. And I think that's a lot of times what we as pastors and church leaders have done to abuse survivors. We put all the burden on you. You need to forgive. You need to get on with your life. You need to do this. You need to do that. And we're not helping you.
Right.
And that's exactly what Jesus is talking about there. That's got to change.
And I think, too, they use your pain and your need to heal as unforgiveness or unloving. And it has nothing to do with either one of those. It has to do with the trauma that you've endured. You have to go through the healing process. And whether you forgive or not doesn't help you just automatically be okay.
You can't forgive something that has not been acknowledged.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a forgiving attitude, but they don't benefit from it at all.
And you as a victim, like when you go through that process of getting to a place of forgiveness, you have to first acknowledge everything that has happened to you. You have to go through that process of that trauma healing, of recognizing, because there's a lot, when you experience trauma, you go through a process of disassociating from everything, normalizing, minimizing, all of those pieces. And so that part of that journey is having a safe place to acknowledge this really did happen and this was bad. And then after that is integrated, then there's this aspect of forgiveness. And like you said, you can have a forgiving spirit, right? But you can't really forgive something you haven't been able to either acknowledge yourself.
Right.
And so as a mom, my side of the story, I shared earlier, I'm a survivor of childhood abuse. And so when Sarah disclosed to me, I immediately responded with, I believe you, because that's all I ever wanted was somebody to say that to me. And so I had a little understanding, because I had had some time to go through some healing. I had a little understanding of what she was going through. But what that did was compound my shame, because here I am, a survivor of abuse, and I couldn't even protect my own daughter. What kind of mother am I? I mean, I felt like a failure, absolute failure. But it did give me the understanding to know that when she is so educated herself on trauma and all that she's been through, but I knew what she was talking about. I identified with it. I heard it. And so when it was brought to my attention that it was still going on in the church, I became an advocate and, called you guys. But I became a fierce advocate. Like, I want things to change. And so she has been so willing to share her story. And I'm like, I'm with you all the way. Like, as much as I feel shame, I don't care what the world thinks of me. I am going to fight with her to see what she needs. And we've asked over and over, what do you need? What do you need? And I know that the letter that she wrote to the elders, what she has said all along is she wants this to have an impact, to see change so that people are protected, so that nobody else has to go through that again. And I realize we can't save the whole world, but if we can save one.
Right, right. Well, the thing, if we as the church cannot bring about the kind of change in our churches to better protect our children from sexual abuse, and as well as to better love them and care for them in their healing journey, we may as well fold our Bibles up and go home, put it on the shelf, and never come back.
Exactly. And why can we make other things so much more important? Like, let's fight the school and what they're teaching our children. Yes, but why aren't you fighting for your children to be safe in their own Sunday schools?
Yeah.
Like,
So I think it's part of like a syndrome where we see everybody else's problems. So sexual abuse, trafficking, that's a big city problem. It's a problem, down in Miami. It's a problem in New York City. And what most people don't realize, it's happening underneath their noses, and most of them are just not aware of it.
Yeah.
but you did say something about them not being educated, like as far as leaders in the church not being educated. But we see them being educated and still choosing to protect their image. And the comment that was made that was so hurtful is when our own family members said, well, why would you drag God's name through this?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that the churches, it's really easy to blame the victim and the people trying to advocate for the victim. Why are you doing this? Why did the offender drag God's name through this? Why did the offender in God's name rape and molest a child?
Yeah.
There's something systemically wrong when the church consistently, and not all churches do this, some churches get it right, but when we see it over and over and over again, the church is doing the wrong things and putting the burden back on the victims, the victim blaming, and not holding the offenders accountable. And I don't know if it's just because, Faith says sometimes at our conferences that it's easier to believe maybe that a child is lying about something than to believe that somebody that's a friend of theirs or somebody that they love or care about could do something so monstrous. And so they fool themselves or convince themselves that it's the child.
Well, when you have a traumatic experience, your first response is denial, and the thing with church leaders or even family members, their first response is denial, and then they never get out of that. They just never move on to another stage.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So as long as they can stay in that stage of denial, then they can live with whatever's happened because they're in that denial. And then if the victim keeps bringing it up and then they're confronted with, well, maybe this happened, they just want to still push that down so that they can stay in that state of denial where they don't have to face the fact that I loved this person and I trusted this person, and now he's not what he said. He's not what he represented. And I was fooled. And I think that that's a big part of it.
I think you're right.
And then, bringing in that if you talk about it, then you're shaming God's name. And God, I actually felt that way. That's why I would never tell my story, because I'm a pastor's kid and everything that God is good, right? And so anything that I couldn't explain or I couldn't understand in my story, I just didn't talk about, because I thought I had to make God look good. I had to be a good representative of God.
Yeah.
He couldn't represent himself. I have to make sure that his name isn't put in the mud because of what happened to me, because people would say, well, where's your God when you were being abused? And I think God is big enough to live out who he is,
Yeah.
even when bad things happen to us.
Right.
And us talking about those bad things doesn't make God bad. It makes us want things to get better. And how can we make it better? If we don't talk about it, it's not going to get better.
Yeah. I came to the conclusion that I do not need to defend God. I do not need to work on his reputation. And I don't need to protect the church. That's not my job. It's not my job to do that. And that's what one of the turning points was for me to really get behind and help Sarah is like, God doesn't need protection.
Sarah does.
Sarah,
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
Sarah does. God doesn't.
Right. No, that's excellent. I mean, how many times in the Psalms does David talk about God being a place of refuge?
Yeah. Yeah.
Conversations of Hope extends beyond this podcast. Michelle and I are available to speak at women's, youth, church, and community events.
We offer presentations on abuse prevention, healing, and empowerment.
To learn more about our speaking engagements and personal coaching and support services, visit our website, conversationsofhopepodcast.org.
Together, we can inspire change and promote healing in your community.
So, as church leaders, if there's church leaders listening, I think we need to be better at listening to victims and survivors and asking them, hey, what do you need? What can we do for you? And in our experience, most victims and survivors, they aren't out to ruin the church. They want things to be better so that the people coming behind can be safer. And I think we need to be more proactive in teaching our young people how to have a voice. And if they have questions and doubts, that they aren't going to be shut down just for voicing their concerns or voicing, what's going on here, because God's big enough that he can answer our questions. If we're like, this is confusing to me. Why would God allow this? Or why would God say that this is right when it's not right for this situation? And we also need to teach our young people how they can discern evil intent and how they can discern what are good relationships, what are healthy relationships, what are red flags in a relationship, what is abusive and disrespectful. Because if even in dating relationships, we need to know, how do we spot somebody that's not a good person to be in a relationship with, and make it so that we can keep open conversation with our parents, with our peers, with our church leaders, and say, this person is being disrespectful to me. He's abusing me. He's hitting me. And what can I do without being shut down? Well, you just need to trust God, or you just need to pray more. And those types of things. We do need more opportunities for young people.
So, Sarah, back to you for just a minute. Now, your mom said just a minute ago how important it was for her to hear that somebody believed her. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the things she made sure to do with you. I was just wondering if maybe you could share with folks if there's just a few things that maybe your mom and dad have done that's been really helpful.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, acknowledging that. My mom's fierceness, like you relate a story and you're watching for the reaction. I see my dad crushed, and then I see my mom ready to fight. She's like, let's go. Whatever you need, baby. Like, I'm right there with you. And when I had said that I was going to make official report, she was like, whatever I need, whatever you need, I'll be there with you. So I think there was the acknowledgement. For me, a lot of it was the acknowledgement. There's times when I still sit with, did this happen? Was this my experience? Like, again, because I was pretty young. So to have that conversation with my parents, which for them, it's really hard. Yeah. It's hard but for them to sit in that discomfort long enough for them to then mirror back to me, yeah, that, that was wrong, or that was inappropriate, or your experience is not wrong here. Like, so having that conversation, which is essential. I know it's super hard, but it's been validating. It validates my story every time, and validates my experience. And then I would say it's the pieces of like supporting me, of saying like, what do you need? Like actual literal help. Like, do you need me to come sit with the kids while you go to therapy? Do you need me to come get your kids from school so that you can go meet with an attorney? That practical help says, I am with you. I am here for you. When they share my story on social media, when they're not afraid to talk about it, when they're not afraid, like every time that they speak up publicly, it validates me and it takes away the shame, and it really is powerful.
That's great. And I know there's going to be some parents that are going to be watching this that are going to find that incredibly helpful, because I'm sure a lot of them they're overwhelmed and they don't know how to help. And if there's tension in the relationship, but you just, I think, gave some great.
Yeah, I also will say, like, through the journey, there's parts where, for me, right, because this was a lot of spiritual abuse, and I've told my parents that, like, for me, that was almost worse than any of the sexual abuse, was using God's name to do it, and me carrying around this unworthiness, right? So my personal journey has gone through its ups and downs, and, kind of had to, right? And so to have that unconditional love and support, not ostracizing me, not saying, well, that you're not following our family belief system, so we are not going to support you. That has been huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And when the engagement ended, because of the spiritual abuse and him telling you over and over and over again that this was God's will, and all of a sudden it's not God's will anymore, you're looking at it like, oh, what did I do that failed God, and I'm not worthy, I'm not his will anymore, and not looking at it like he was using God's will and it was never his will. It's that feeling, because of the spiritual abuse, that you failed God. Mm-hmm. And that would probably be pretty hard to overcome.
Decades, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it took me decades, right, of work around shame resilience, because I really did believe, to my core, I believed that I was unworthy of ever loving. I mean, just the gravity of that for a moment, of ever being loved, right, of ever being able to be brought into that sense of belonging. I did not feel that I was deserving of any of that.
Now, did you ever voice your feelings so nobody else around you knew that that's what you were struggling with?
No, because I thought that was because of the purity culture aspect, right, of
staying pure.
And I knew that I had failed that, which also, like, can we talk about the fact that purity culture creates the sense that any of that type of sin is the highest sin of all time, it feels like.
And you're ruined for life.
You're ruined for life, right? That was it. I mean, it was so disgusting. All of the things we were taught in youth group of if you do this, like, you're stealing from your, future husband, you are, abomination to God, you are chewed up bubble gum, like all of these torn up paper, just deflowered, all of these terms that make you feel like I'm really unredeemable because this is what had happened and it was my fault, right? Because women in the purity culture, girls in the purity culture were taught that we are the stumbling block, right? It's our responsibility to dress appropriately, to walk appropriately, to manage all of our behavior around boys and men so that we don't cause lust. Never really a lot of responsibility on. Sorry,
in one of our presentations, it's called "Blameless in His Eyes," and it's based out of Matthew 18, the first 14 verses on the little children. And in that, when we do the presentation, we actually, at the end of it, we'll have white roses that we present to any of the abuse survivors that would like to receive one. And it's a sign of their innocence. I mean, God clearly what happened was horrific. It not only was an egregious sin, it was a violent crime.
Yes.
But God lays the abuse and the guilt at the feet of the offender, not the innocent child. And even though you went through horrific stuff, and all children experience sexual abuse and other forms of abuse, go through horrific stuff, they're innocent in God's eyes. It's the abuser that's in really big trouble.
And I think, too, that purity culture, when a girl has been abused and it wasn't her fault. I mean, there's date rape, there's all kinds of things that they have no control over. They couldn't stop it. And then when they feel like, okay, I am marred for life and nobody's going to be able to love me because I am unpure. And that puts an astronomical burden on these young girls. And they feel like, okay, like in my case, I was abused from age 9 to 18. I had no say. I could not. Children, obey your parents, for this is right. He's my dad. He's telling me I have to do this. So I'm doing what God's word says I need to do. But now I am also
Doing something God's word says not to do.
Yeah. And it's like, in my case, I knew, because the Holy Spirit actually, confirmed in me that it was not my fault, that my dad was sinning against me. And I thank the Lord that I had that in me, that I didn't take that guilt and shame onto me. But there are so many girls in the purity culture. In the purity culture also, it strips away the strength of the man too. It's like they have no control over their emotions. They can't control themselves. So women have to be dressed a certain way, walk a certain way, not be in a certain area. We're all the ones responsible for how men think, and they aren't responsible for any of their actions. So it also makes men look weak, and women are the control factor in their lust. And that's not true. God doesn't do that in his word. He doesn't say men. It's the woman that's the problem. And so we as women feel like we're always the problem.
Always.
And it's not true. And then when we're abused, we take that shame up on ourselves. So we do need to change our whole culture to say we aren't responsible for the way that you think and for the way that you act. You are responsible for your own actions.
And I want to just throw in here, there's so many things we'd like to say, and then we get done and it's like, I should have said this. But just to acknowledge that there are a lot of boys that are sexually abused too.
That's true.
And it's staggering. With girls, they say somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 girls raped or molested by the time they're 18. With boys, it's around 1 in 6. Some statistics
not that
show.
much different.
Yeah, I mean, it's staggering.
And that's who's disclosed, right? Because there's the
The vast majority don't.
Right. Or wait until they're much older.
Yeah.
Sarah was younger than me.
Yeah.
About the same age. I don't know.
So
You go ahead, Dale.
I was just going to say, put it back in your court. Is what else would you like to say about, kind of your story, what you went through? Is there anything you want to say maybe to other parents, other survivors?
Well, before you asked that question, I had a thought.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I guess, for parents, one of the things that is just starting to help me was every podcast that Faith does. She always goes back to, it was the abuser who was at fault. It was not the victim's fault.
Yeah.
And that can't be said enough, right, Sarah?
Yeah.
Like, I have to hear that because I wanted to take all the responsibility because I'd learned that as a child to take on my abuser's responsibility. So when this happened to Sarah, it was my fault. And I have to keep reminding myself, no, that man sitting in that jail cell facing those charges is the one at fault.
Yes.
And as much as I'm frustrated with the church, I can't blame the church 100% either. because he was the perpetrator. He was the one that chose to do that evil and take advantage of the situation and harm my daughter in the most horrendous way. And so I appreciate everyone who is willing to continue that conversation, because that's not necessarily what we hear. Yeah. We hear, oh, it was an affair, and we try to put the blame, it's shared blame. And no, it was the abuser who did the wrong thing and sinned against another person.
And to that, I would say for victims, for survivors, to be able to continually remember that they're not responsible when they come and report for other people's emotions or how they handle it.
Yes.
Right? That is not their responsibility. And I will say for parents and supporters and advocates to remind those survivors that they're not responsible for other people's reactions and emotions to what happened to them.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as parents, I have to check, because I have really strong emotions. We've heard them tonight, right? I have really strong emotions, but I don't ever want them to supersede what Sarah's feeling.
Right.
I don't want to ever add to what she's feeling. Mm-hmm. I don't want her to have to stop and think, oh, mom's going to be upset by this.
Right. And I feel like that's one thing that I feel like we are doing really good at. And I've taken some time, but I will say that my parents have taken they have their people. They're not coming to me to also deal with, I don't know how to, we're not
trying to process.
Healing together.
We're healing together.
I'm not carrying the weight of their pain either.
Right.
If that makes sense.
And I don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, we're supporting her and we're feeling bad about what she's going through. We're also feeling bad ourselves, but that is not
they're
hers.
Not putting it on
That's
me.
not hers.
It my
no,
responsibility.
It's not.
It's not yours to carry.
Nope. You got more than enough. But you're doing such a good job with that. We are so proud of our daughter.
So that's super. That's super. We really appreciate you all coming and being able to spend time. And I know with observing Faith, each time she would share a story, I think she would heal a little bit more. And it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah, it is.
But we really appreciate you being here.
Well, we appreciate what you guys do.
Yeah.
We appreciate your support. We really, really do. And the education that you're bringing, and the podcast bringing things out, and just all of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And, just let me end with saying this, along with Sarah. Churches, pastors, you can do better.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope this episode of Conversations of Hope has been a source of comfort and inspiration.
Remember, you are not alone on this journey of healing.
Visit conversationsofhopepodcast.org for more resources and information.
Please subscribe or follow and share with those who might need this message of hope. Until next time, keep hope alive.